This Sustainable Development Agenda, the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, it's a much fuller development agenda than we have had for a long time. And it covers a whole range of different areas, including issues to do with the climate crisis, including issues to do with infrastructure. The governments say they don't have enough money. A lot of governments also say that the expertise that is needed and the efficiency are also with the private and the business sector. Now we have a bit of a problem here because the private sector cannot be involved unless it's a market orientation for them, unless they're going to be able to make some profit. And so much of what we care about in development isn't necessarily something that is quote unquote marketable. On the one hand, we listen to the argument that there isn't enough public money, therefore we need the private sector. And then we see that more of the so-called limited public money is actually being used not to provide the kinds of essential services, but to actually bring incentives to the private sector. And the other part of the irony in this whole conversation is there's tons of public money. It's just used in different ways. It's not necessarily committed to development. It's used for the military. It's used for a whole range of different areas that the state is responsible for. And also, with a lot of state policies, they are actually not collecting the kinds of taxes that they should be collecting from the more wealthy, whether it's corporations or individuals. And so there could also be a lot more public money. To actually address so many of those challenges, it can't be done by the market. Climate crisis is named as one of the biggest market failures that we have. We have a situation where long-term investment to bring about changes in energy, for example, are not going to be profitable in the short term. And therefore you need the public sector to lead in these areas. If we look at education and health and water, again, some of the risks of incentivizing bringing in the private sector to take care of it, so many people will not be able to buy the education, to buy the health services, to buy the access in terms of what they need. And so ironically enough, one of the major risks with this kind of an approach is it's going to widen inequalities, not reduce them. The public sector is essential for gender equality and women's rights. More women are employed in the public sector. To have strategies to deal with the care economy and the burden of the care economy, which is taken heavily by women, we actually need to have public health services. We actually need to have education services. We need to make sure that you don't have to spend 4 hours walking for water and being exposed to violence with regard to these things. So when we actually look at what the SDGs have called for, women are in the forefront. And if it doesn't work for women, it absolutely doesn't work at all. There are discussions with the voluntary signings of things like the Sustainable Development Goals, that they're aspirational and they sound good, but where's the compliance? And the funny thing is, more governments, and not only governments, almost everybody now says that they are an important part of the solution for the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have a much broader accountability mechanism, opportunities for the kind of work that's needed of name and shame. I see these as complementary. I do not see from experience that so-called hard law is more effective than soft law. But on the one hand, if we actually could use the one to get the commitments, the accountability, the monitoring, the indicators, then start to use that kind of information and evidence when governments report through mechanisms like CEDAW, then I actually think that we could have some very, very powerful alliances. The fact that money was leaving India, enabled by Switzerland's legislation, laws, meant that women's rights to health, for example, were undermined in India because all of this was undermining the capacity and the resources of the public sector in India to actually secure women's rights. and women's access to essential services. The CEDAW committee agreed and indicated that Switzerland might need to look again at their legislation. CEDAW is based on country reporting. So CEDAW has a much stronger explicit rights agenda. But so many of the issues that we're facing today are cross-border. Violence against women in Cambodia could be because of the operations of Canadian mining companies. And so we have this cross-border issue, and we have this huge gap on extraterritorial rights, as it's called. And it seems to me that if we actually had a strategy to work the SDGs and CEDAW in conjunction, we would have a very powerful package, rather than seeing them as alternatives or seeing them in competition.